What if I told you that the line between who we think we are and who we could be is thinner than we imagine? What if our most fundamental identity, our sexuality, wasn't a fortress, but a house with unlocked doors? In July of 2025, a bizarre and deeply unsettling case emerged from Nanjing, China, that seemed to rip a hole in our conventional understanding of desire. It was called the Sister Hong incident. At its center, a person known as Sister Hong was discovered to be a 38-year-old man who, presenting as a woman, engaged in intimate encounters with a significant number of male partners who identified as straight. The internet, predictably, exploded. The first wave was mockery. How could they not know? How could a straight guy fall for that? But beneath the jokes, a more profound and uncomfortable question was bubbling up. This wasn't just a simple story of deception. This was a story about the very nature of attraction, the scripts that secretly guide our actions, and the powerful forces of shame and commitment that can lead us to places we never thought we'd go. So today, we're not going to laugh. We're going to try and understand what really happened in the minds of the men who met Sister Hong. The answer is far more complex and far more human than you might think. To even begin to understand this, we have to challenge our most basic assumption. What does it mean to be straight? We tend to think of sexual orientation as a rigid binary. You're attracted to women or you're attracted to men. Full stop. But human psychology is rarely that clean. One of the ideas explored in sexuality studies is the concept of situational sexuality. This suggests that for some people, attraction isn't just about the biological sex of a partner, but can be heavily influenced by the situation, the environment, and the presentation of certain traits. Think of it this way. Straightness for many men isn't an absolute rejection of everything male. It's a powerful preference for femininity. Sister Hong, through dress, makeup, a filtered online persona, and gentle mannerisms, wasn't offering a biological reality. He was offering a convincing performance of femininity. For the men who sought him out, this performance was enough to trigger a genuine response. Their attraction wasn't necessarily for the man underneath, but for the female characteristics being projected. The softness, the perceived vulnerability, the flirtatious interaction, these were the keys that unlocked the door of their desire. It highlights a fascinating aspect of our psychology. Sometimes, the symbol can be more powerful than the reality it's meant to represent. The brain sees the signals of femininity it has been conditioned to seek, and it responds accordingly. But even if attraction is sparked, that doesn't explain why these encounters proceeded. And for that, we need to talk about the invisible scripts that run our lives. In sociology and psychology, there's a concept called sexual script theory. The idea is that from a very young age, our culture, through movies, books, and social norms, hands us a set of unwritten scripts for how to behave in sexual situations. For a heterosexual man, that script usually involves initiating, pursuing, and escalating an encounter with a woman. When the men in the Sister Hong case arranged a meeting, they did so under the belief they were meeting a woman. From the moment they walked into that room, their brains activated the heterosexual script. They weren't consciously thinking, Step 1, flirt. Step 2, initiate touch. They were simply falling into a deeply learned pattern of behavior. They were actors in a play, and Sister Hong had set the stage perfectly. Once a powerful script like this is running, it can function almost like autopilot. Critical thinking and rational analysis take a back seat. The brain is focused on following the familiar sequence of events it has been taught to expect from such an encounter. This is why people in high-pressure sales situations buy things they don't need, or why we follow social etiquette even when it feels awkward. The script is running, and breaking from it requires a significant amount of cognitive effort. So, for these men, they weren't navigating a new, strange situation. In their minds, they were following the most familiar map they had. But here's where it gets truly complicated. Because at some point, for at least some of them, the illusion must have faltered. There must have been a moment of realization, a jarring disconnect between the script and the reality. So, why didn't they just leave? The answer lies in two of the most powerful traps of the human mind: shame and the sunk cost fallacy. Imagine the scene. You're in a private room. You've made yourself vulnerable. You've committed to this course of action. And then you realize something is deeply wrong. What's your first emotional reaction? For many, it would be a tidal wave of shame. Shame is a profoundly social emotion. It's the intensely painful feeling that we are flawed, that we are unworthy, and that we have made a fool of ourselves. In that moment of realization, the thought isn't just, "This is not what I expected." It's, "I can't believe I fell for this. What does this say about me?" To stand up and leave at that point isn't just an act of rejection. It's a profound act of self-incrimination. It's admitting you were deceived, that your judgment failed. The shame of that admission can be so paralyzing that staying and seeing the act through feels like the less humiliating option. It's a desperate attempt to avoid the crushing judgment both from the other person and from oneself. And this feeling is compounded by a classic cognitive bias known as the sunk cost fallacy. This is the human tendency to continue with something we've invested in, not because it's the rational choice, but because we don't want our previous investment to have been a waste. We've all done this. We finish a terrible movie because we've already watched the first hour. We keep a failing project going because we've already poured so much money into it. The costs for the men in this situation weren't just financial. They had invested time, emotional energy, courage, and risk. They had overcome their own anxieties to be there. To walk away means accepting that all of that investment was for nothing. The thought process becomes, "Well, I've already come this far," a phrase that reportedly came up in discussions around the case. I might as well see it through. This irrational need to justify our past efforts can lead us to throw good money, or in this case, good judgment after bad. The combination is devastating. The shame of admitting a mistake and the irrational desire to not waste the effort it took to get there. Together, they create a psychological cage that can be incredibly difficult to escape. So, when we look at the Sister Hong incident, reducing the victims to a punchline is a profound mistake. It ignores the incredible complexity of our own psychology. It wasn't necessarily about a hidden orientation. It was about the fact that sexuality can be more fluid and context-dependent than our rigid labels suggest. It wasn't just about foolishness. It was about the power of cultural scripts to put our brains on autopilot, guiding our actions down familiar paths even when the terrain is treacherous. And it wasn't a simple failure of will. It was a demonstration of how the paralyzing force of shame and the irrational logic of sunk costs can corner us into making decisions that, from the outside, seem incomprehensible. This case holds up a mirror. It forces us to question how fixed our own identities really are. It reveals the powerful, invisible forces that shape our most intimate behaviors. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that the line between a rational decision and an irrational one is often blurred by the very human desire to avoid embarrassment and justify our own choices. The story of Sister Hong isn't just about them. It's about the strange, fascinating, and sometimes frightening architecture of the human mind. And it's a conversation that is absolutely worth having. What are your thoughts on this? Where do you see these psychological forces playing out in the world, or even in your own life? Share your perspective in the comments below.